Masechet Yevamot, Daf Nun Dalid. We start on Nun Gimel Amud Bet with the new Mishnah and the new Perek. This Perek is going to include a lot of important and interesting topics. For example, the definition of how to fulfill Piru Urvu. We begin with the definition of what is considered a sexual act that would be valid in order to perform Yibum, and we'll see lots of different scenarios. So, Haba al Yevimto, someone does Yibum, but he has different states of mind that are possible. Ben b'shogeg, ben b'mezid, ben be'ones, ben b'rason. One of these four states of mind. One is shogeg. Well, how do you have intercourse without, by mistake? It means he knows he's having intercourse, but he thinks it's with his wife or with a different woman. He doesn't know it's the Yevamah. That's shogeg. Mezid usually means he does it on purpose. In this case, the Gemara is going to explain that, yes, he knows that he is having intercourse with the Yevamah, but he does not have intention for it to be Yibum. He just wants it to be Zinut, just promiscuous relations, not for Yibum. That's the case of Mezid. All these will work. All these, even though he doesn't have the proper full intention, all these actually perform Yibum. Ben be'ondus, whether he's forced, right? People come and physically force him to do Yibum. He doesn't want to. It still works. Ben be'rason, or whether he is willing, or she. Afilu hu shogeg v'hi mezida, hu mezid v'hi shogeget. And now it's going to bring both pairs, the man and the woman. It doesn't matter who has which state of mind. Even if he thinks he's with his wife, he doesn't know that this is the Yevamah. And she does know, but she does not have intention for it to be for mitzvah. Or he has no intention for it to be mitzvah, and she doesn't even know it's the Yavam. So neither of them have intention that they're doing this with the right person for mitzvah. Or hu anus v'hi lo anusa, hi anusa v'hu lo anus. He is being forced at gunpoint, but she is not being forced, or she is being forced and he is not. Whether he just begins the act of intercourse. There's a Gemara today is going to use a lot of euphemisms. It's a bit PG-13, so if I only repeat the euphemisms, and that might not be clear, so I'll translate some of them just enough to make sure it's clear. So someone who just begins to insert his member and does not, but not fully, that's called me'areh. That is considered a sexual act, or whether he is fully inserts himself. Kana, all these cases, the Yibum works, and they are fully married. And there's also no difference between the type of intercourse, whether it's regular frontal or anal. From the back. Okay, all that is true for Yibum. All these cases, no matter what, the Yibum is effective. And the same is true regarding other prohibited relations. When will someone be liable for being with one of the arayot in the Torah? Also, it doesn't matter what his state of mind is, whether it's on purpose, by mistake, he knows what he's doing, he doesn't know what he's doing. All those will still be considered a liable, prohibited act. Or pisulot, or people that are not adayot, that would be chayav karet or chayav mitah, but rather the lesser level of pisulot, that people that one is not allowed to marry, but only allow, and if he does effect a marriage, then the marriage is valid. Kigon almana lekohen gadol, almana may not marry a widow. It's pasul, gerusha v'chalutza lekohen hejot, or a divorcee, or someone who got chalitza cannot marry any kohen. All these cases, they are pisulot, they will cause the children to be prohibited to a kohen, and they would not be able to continue to eat terumah. Mamzeret unetila l'Israel, a woman who is a mamzeret, or a netina is of a problematic conversion, like the Gibeonites who converted under false pretenses. So they are prohibited from marrying into Israel. If they do, the marriage is effective, but the children are invalid. Bat Yisrael mamzel natin pesala, or someone, a Jewish woman who marries a mamzer or a natin. All these will cause her also, this woman, to be herself to be pesula. Like if she's a bat kohen, she will no longer ever be able to eat terumah. And in all these cases, v'lo chilek ben bi'ah lebi'ah, also here, it doesn't matter if the intercourse is frontal or or anal. So since we're already defining what is a sexual act for yibum, so we bring in these other cases as well where it's relevant. Okay, now we're going to ask a style question. The word afilu. Why does it say afilu? He already brought in all four categories. So then, isn't it clear that doesn't matter who is what? That all of them would be a valid act. Why does it say afilu? My afilu, and we answer lami ba'ya kamar. It's saying, yeah, this is true, and needless to say, the next cases. Not only will it be a valid yibum if he doesn't know it's her, and she does have in mind that this will be for mitzvah, or if he has no intention to do mitzvah, and she does have intention for mitzvah, and there at least one party has intention, that for sure will be good. Rather, even if he doesn't know who she is, and she has no intention for mitzvah, neither of them has intention to do yibum. Nevertheless, the yibum works. So that's the afilu, even in such a case. Taneh Rabbi Chiya, afilu shenehem shogegim, shenehem mezidim, shenehem anusim. Rabbi Chiya has a braita, and he adds to the Mishnah, a case that the Mishnah does not mention, even if both the Yavam and the Yavama, they don't know who each other are. It's dark and they're confused, or they know who each other are, but they both say, we're going to have relations, but not for yibum. Or even if both of them are forced. Okay, the Gemara is going to go through a lengthy discussion on what is the case of forced. What does that mean? How exactly are they being forced? But the point is that even though they're being forced into it, nevertheless, the yibum is a yibum and they are married. All right, so anus, the matitin hechidameh. When we say anus, that one category of state of mind of being coerced, what exactly is the case? So a simple answer would be some thugs came. That goyim here says, but whatever, it doesn't really matter. The point is, someone takes them at gunpoint and says, "You better do yibum or die." And he does it. So that would be a case of coercion, right? I mean, in general, you're not allowed to violate the big three, even in the case of coercion. But if you do violate, then it's not chayav mitah. In this case, he's not doing a prohibition; he's actually performing a mitzvah. Okay. So if maybe that's the case, but here's the thing: and honest it can't be that, because even though he's being forced at gunpoint, nevertheless he has to do a sexual act and he has to be physically aroused. His member would have to be erect in order to perform this act, and that shows that even if in his mind he's being forced and doesn't want to do it, it's only because someone's pointing a gun at him. Nevertheless, his body is saying through its arousal that he has desire for her and wants to do this act, and that is enough to call it willing. So that's Rava's point. And kishui ela and honest le'adva. There's no being forced. You can't claim. This would be for the negative also. If someone's forced to commit an adva, and he says, "Well, I don't want to. I was forced, right? So I'm not guilty." Yeah, but if his body is aroused, then that is enough of a willingness that he would be that he cannot claim that he was coerced. Okay, so it can't be that case that is talking about anus because of Rava's principle. So instead, we have to figure out a situation where he is not aroused or because of her. Right, he has to be aroused to do an act, but it can't be because of her. So here's next option: Ela biyashen. Maybe he's sleeping, and while he's sleeping, he's erect for other reasons. Veha amar Rav Yehuda yashen lo kana bivimto, but that is not good, because we have another principle that someone sleeping does not, if let's say a guy's sleeping and she comes and has intercourse with him while he is sleeping, that is not considered yibum, because he has no da'at at all. He doesn't even know he's having intercourse. So that's zero. So that's too little knowledge. Okay, even though it would be of kind of coerced situation. So third possibility is something that somehow, by mistake, he was inserted into her. For example, let's say he was on the roof with his wife, and so he's aroused because of his wife, and by mistake he falls off the roof, and somehow, 1 in a billion chance, she had been lying down on the pavement, and he falls onto her and inserted into her and performs intercourse. So he was not aroused because of her, and somehow, just by mistake, he knew that he was awake, and he knew that what was going on. So maybe that is the case of coercion. All right, but that can't be either. Actually spoke about this case. And not that I think it ever happened, but because it's just interesting theoretically. So Rabbah said about that if that happens, this guy who fell off the roof is liable to pay for 4 things: injury, if he causes her injury, any pain that she feels by having a guy fall off a roof on top of her, any medical costs that's required, and if she can't go to work, he has to pay for her loss of income. So, like any damage, she should have been more careful in balancing himself up on the roof there. So, however, if it's yibum, he does not acquire her. So we know that this case on the roof is not sufficient of an act of doing something. He had no idea what he was doing here. That's not sufficient for it to be yibum, so it can't be this case either. So another last try. Ela kigon shenitkaven leishto utkafato yevimto uba'aleha shenehem anusim teber bichia uba'aleha. So it's like the case would be that he's intending for his wife. He's with his wife and he's aroused for her, and then the Yevamah barges in and forces herself upon him, and so that's the case where he is coerced. All right, so that case would work. However, we still have one last question here. The Bichaya, remember, added another case that the Mishnah didn't mention explicitly, that both of them are coerced. So the case you just mentioned is only he is coerced by her. But how would you ever have a case where both are coerced? We answer, Kegon shenitkaven leishto utkafuhu goyim v'dibikum ze bazeh uba'aleha. So beware, a person is aroused by his wife, and all of a sudden, these thugs barge in, and they bring the Yevamah, and now since he's not aroused by her, so then we don't have the problem of Rava. He's not aroused by the Yevamah, so we don't have the problem of Rava, that any arousal shows some willingness, and then that would not be called coerced. Here, he's only aroused because of his wife. And then the thugs come in, and they force the Yavam and the Yevamah to perform intercourse, and he does. That is a case where both of them will be forced. All right, so we have an answer to the case. And now, we're going to go back to the Mishnah that mentioned those 4 categories and look for a source. So, minaha nemile, how do you know that whether he doesn't know it's her, knows it's her, and doesn't want to perform yibum, whether he's coerced or whether he does it willingly? How do we know that in all these cases the act of yibum is valid? The Tanura Banan. Yevamah yavo aleha mitzvah. So we're quoting a midrash halacha that says the yavam will come, her yavam, her brother-in-law will come upon her, and that shows that this is a mitzvah, that the preferable option is to perform yibum, because then you're taking care of her, upholding the name of the deceased, and this is a mitzvah that is preferred over halitza. Even though we saw that Abba Shaul says otherwise, so this, from here we learn that he should Yevamah bo aleha. And then the midrash is davar acher, or another interpretation of these very same words is Yevamah yavo aleha ben shogeg ben bezid ben be'ones ben bedason. Right, so as long as he comes upon her, meaning he is with her, so it doesn't matter how. We don't ask any other questions about what his state of mind is. That doesn't matter. So that's the source for it. Now the Gemara is going to ask, mitzvah. Hold on, you already used those same words to teach a mitzvah. You can't use them again. Okay, interestingly, if you look at the original source of the Midrash Halacha, and it's also quoted in the Talmud Yerushalmi, they have no problem learning two things from one verse. And so that is a principle in Midrash, in the original Tanaitic Midrash Halacha and in Yerushalmi. They say one pasuk can have multiple meanings, multiple applications. There's no problem with that. The Talmud Bavli, however, has a stricter methodology and says you can only learn one law from one pasuk, and one pasuk can only teach one law. It has to be a one-to-one correlation. You can't have one pasuk teaching many things, and you can't learn the same thing from more than one pasuk. And so, therefore, the Bavli says, no, we need more clarification. You can't use the same thing twice. The mitzvah, me ve'im lo yachpos ha'ish nafka. Oh, so you know what? We learned that is the preferred method to take care of Yevamah through Yibum. We learned that from the words im lo yachpos. If the man says, I don't want to, only then you do chalitza, because that's the secondary option. Plan B, ha-chafetz yabem. But if he wants to, then he should do yibum. That is the preferred plan A. So we know that from another pasuk, v'chi ataqira, and this pasuk, Yevamah yavo aleha, teaches, ben b'shogeg, ben mezid, ben be'onos, ben b'rason. Good, so that's our source. We have another braita that learns it from a different part. Tanya idach, Yevamah yavo aleha, kedarka ulkacha shelo kedarka. Here takes those words. Yevamah should be her brother-in-law should be with her, and that is talking about regular intercourse. Ulkacha shelo kedarka is anal intercourse, and both of them are valid for yibum. V'yibem bi'a gomeret ba ve'en kesef ushtar gomrin ba. This refers to the next word in the pasuk that reads Yevamah yavo aleha ulkacha lo leisha, and then it says v'yibemah. That last word v'yibemah can be broken down. It could have just said v'yibem, and so from that part of the word we learn that only bi'ah can complete the process of yibum. He has to have intercourse in order to be fully married. And the other things that he does, if he gives her money or a shtar, like a kiddushin, that does not fulfill the full marriage. It can strengthen the bond, but ultimately he has to be in order to perform yibum. So that's what we learn from that ulkacha lo. Ulkacha lo, that could refer to a kind of kiddushin. But yibem, that teaches that they have to consummate with bi'ah. V'yibemaha, and now the full word that it says, not just v'yibem, v'yibemah teaches ba'al korcha, even against her will. Not a good thing to do, but if he does force her, the Yavam forces the Yevamah, nevertheless the Yibum is valid. And then this Midrash Halacha goes on and says, Davar acher Yevamah yavo aleha ben b'shogeg, and let's go back to those original words and says, if the Yavam is with her, and it says it was with her in any state of mind, it doesn't matter, the Yibum works. And so this Braita learned other things from these words. And we asked the same question. This phrase, Yevamot yavo aleha, we already used it one time to teach that regular form of intercourse is valid. So how could you use it twice? Oh no, you know what? We could learn that from another part of the pasuk that says, Me'en Yevami lakim lachiv shem b'Yisrael. She, when the Yevamah goes to the elders and says, my brother-in-law refuses to uphold a name for his brother. So that's what she states. So those words can teach us that in order to uphold the name of the deceased, well, how would that be done? That would be through intercourse that can lead to having a child. That would continue the legacy, the name of the child. And so therefore, we can learn from those words that when Yibum performed properly would be intercourse in a way that can lead to a child, which would be regular intercourse, kedarka. So we can learn that kedarka, regular intercourse, is a valid form of Yibum from that pasuk. That's where you would have a child that would uphold a name. And therefore, the other pasuk, that Yevamah yavo aleha, what does that come for? Ben b'shogeg, ben mezin, ben be'onos, ben b'rason. That teaches us the 4 different states of mind that are all valid. Okay, and now so the Bavli was able to find other pesukim to learn what the Midrash Halacha learned from this very same pasuk, and so now everything is good. All right, those when we were just talking about what is a case of coercion, we cited a few different possibilities, and now we're going to go into those sources that we quoted to reject those possibilities. Gufa. Amar Rav Yehuda, Yashen lo kana bivimto. Someone sleeping cannot perform yibum, even if he's sleeping and he's aroused while he's sleeping, and she then has intercourse with him. Doesn't work because he has no mind at all of what he's doing. And how do we know this? Because Pasuk says, the brother-in-law shall come upon her. Only if he has intention to be with her for as intercourse. And if he's sleeping, he has no idea that he's doing, that he's even having intercourse. So that's not sufficient. V'hatanya ben ayer ben yashen. Hold on, we have a baraita that says that yibum is valid whether he's awake or whether he's sleeping. No, Emma ben Ira ben Yeshana. Maybe we have to change the wording to whether she is awake or she is sleeping. That doesn't matter, but he has to be awake. Wait a second. V'hatanya ben Ayer ben Yashen hu ben Irahi ben Yeshanahi. We have another braita that says doesn't matter whether he is awake or sleeping or whether she is awake or sleeping. In all these cases, if they do somehow or other have intercourse, it works. Oh, you know what? This baraita must be talking about a case when they're only half sleeping, so they're somewhat awake, but they're kind of dozing off, and somehow while dozing, they have some awareness that there is intercourse. That's sufficient. What's the different definition of dozing? That he's asleep but not asleep, awake but not totally awake. If you call his name, then he'll answer. But if you ask him an actual question, like what's 5 times 5, he won't know how to answer. But if you remind him, remember while you were sleeping, I said this. Oh yeah, I do have a memory of that. So when he's in this dazed state, that's where if he does have intercourse with her, or she's in that state, then it is valid. But if he's totally asleep, totally unconscious, then it would not be valid. And that was the case we were speaking about before. Good. Gufa. Let's go analyze further yet another one of the cases that we saw above. Someone who fell off the roof and he fell down on the pavement and somehow got himself inserted into a woman. He has to pay for 4 items, and if she is a yevama, his yevama does not work. What does he have to pay? Nezik, sa'ar, be'shevet, be'ripui. He has to pay for the damages, for any pain, for losing a livelihood, and for doctor's bills. Aval boshet lo mechayev, but not for embarrassment. It could be very embarrassing for her. Everybody's gonna talk about her and this thing that happened to her, but he doesn't have to pay for the shame. Damar mor en chayav ala boshet ad sheyitkaven. Or if the boshet is really, if people were there and saw this, and she would feel ashamed about it. So he doesn't have to pay for that, because you don't have to pay for shaming someone unless you intend to shame them. If you intended to harm them some other way, or did harm them in some other way because you weren't careful and they ended up being shamed, but I didn't have intention. So these other ones you have to pay even without specific intention, even if he was just careless. But for shame, he did not intend specifically to shame her. Amar Rava, nitkaven latiach bekotel, v'yatiach bivimto lo kana. So now we add a couple of other variations of someone who is doing something, but he's not intending to do yibum. If he intends to press his organ against a wall to arouse himself with the wall, and turns out it was not a wall, it was the yevama. I don't know how this could happen. Try not to imagine it, just accept it. She's behind a curtain or something, I don't know. Lo kana does not work because he was not intending to have any intercourse with anyone or anything, or anyone. However, if he meant to press himself against an animal to perform bestiality, and it turns out It was not an animal. It was the Yevamah. Again, don't think too hard about this. And kana, that is valid yibum, because he was intending to have a sexual encounter, and so even though it turns out it was with a different species altogether, nevertheless he did have some intention, and even that is considered like a shogeg case where he doesn't know that he's doing yibum, but he is. As the minimum is that he has to at least be intending to perform a sexual act, and this is sufficient. All right. Back to the Mishnah, it says even if someone only begins to insert his member into her, that is sufficient to be called a sexual act, and it is ibum. Amar ula minayin dahada amina Torah. Could we have a source from the Torah that the beginning of insertion is considered an act? Shene'emar ve'ish asher yishka bet isha dava v'gila et ervata et mekora he'ayra mikan hada amina Torah. The pasuk regarding a man is not allowed to sleep with a nidah. It talks about an extended way, and he shall uncover her nakedness. He has made naked her fountain, made naked. So this word he'era is the same as me'areh, and it means the beginning of insertion. So there you go. It's in the Torah. Okay, fine. We accept this. Hashgacha nidah. We accept that this is true, that this will prohibit a man who's with a nidah, even if there's only a beginning of insertion. But how do we know it will be prohibited even for all other cases of prohibited relations? So you say, we'll learn from nidah. It says it here, and then you could extend it for all other cases. No, not necessarily. Nidah has a stringency that other cases don't have, which is a nidah, not only is he prohibited to be with her, he also becomes tameh. And he'll have to go to mikveh and so on because of that, which is not true of other cases. If a man was with his sister-in-law or aunt or something, that's prohibited, but if she's not a nidah, then he does not become tameh, he can remain tahor. Okay, so you know what? We have another source. We're going to learn it from the brother's wife. Not a case of ibum. A brother's wife who has children, he's alive, and that's prohibited. And in describing that prohibition, it compares it to nidah. Even if she's not nidah. What, is the sister-in-law always nidah, that it calls her nidah? Obviously not. Ela ke nidah. Ma nidah b'hara'a af eshet ach behara'a. Rather, we apply the same law, just like nidah is prohibited even with the beginning of insertion, so too, sister-in-law is prohibited to him even only at the beginning of insertion. Good. Hold on, we can't use this to learn to every other case, because sister-in-law has its own unique feature in that a man can go and marry multiple women, and each one of those wives will be prohibited to his brother. He can go and do kiddushin even to 1,000 women, and thereby increase all these prohibitions. This would be true of anyone who's prohibited through marriage, that it can be increased. And so this is a stringency that does not apply to all other cases where the stringency is only because it's a blood relative and cannot be increased, and therefore we cannot learn from this case to all others that the beginning of insertion is considered a sexual act. So we need another source. Instead, we will learn it from a blood relative, for example, an aunt, either from the father or the mother. This pasuk has the word he'ayra, which is the same word as the beginning of insertion, and therefore we see from an case of an aunt, that is considered an act, a sexual act, and therefore we can learn from here to all others. But no, we can reject this. These are cases where the prohibition comes on its own, just by being born, because they're blood relatives. And so we cannot learn from here to another case where that it is not a blood relative. For example, adultery. A man cannot be with another man's wife, even if they're totally not related. So we wouldn't be able to learn from here to those cases. So mehada lo atya. So from any one of these three precedents, we cannot use either and any one of them to learn all other cases because they'll have a unique feature. So if we can't learn from one, tete mitarte, let's learn from two together, right? Any two will join together and cancel out whatever unique feature each one has. So now, which two are we going to pair up? Mehetiti, tete me eshet ach va'achot av. Let's take the sister-in-law and the aunt cases, right? Those both will cancel out each other's unique features. But that's not good enough. Both of these are, in fact, relatives. And so this would still not be either relatives through marriage or relatives through blood. But this still would, even both these together would not be sufficient to teach me something about adultery where that woman is not related to the man at all. So let's pick a different two. We'll pick nida and the aunt prohibition. Right, nida doesn't have to be related to be prohibited, so that'll solve that problem, right? No good. In both of these cases have a common denominator in that the prohibition comes on its own accord. Nida comes just naturally when the woman's period starts. Can't do anything about that. And the aunt also happens just because of blood relatives. Both of these are not because of an act of marriage, that which is a willing act. And so both of these come on their own. We can't learn from these about prohibitions that come from based on marriage. So let's try the other possibility, which is nida and sister-in-law. And these can cover all cases, right? What else? What can you reject that is not included in the common denominator of these two? All right, this seems to be pretty good, except that we have a question on it. Matkifla Rav Acha bered Rav Ika, Malenida ve'eshetach sheken en lahem heter bechaye osran. These two also have a unique feature that they share, that they cannot be permitted in the lifetime of that which prohibits it. Toma be'eshet ish sheken yesh la heter bechaye osra, which is unlike eshet ish, which can be prohibited in the lifetime of that which prohibits it. What do we mean by this? Well, a nida, she is prohibited as long as there is menstrual blood, and cannot be permitted while that which is prohibiting her, which is the blood, is still around. And that shares a feature with eshet ach, that a sister-in-law can only be prohibited after the brother dies without children, but as with Yibum, but while the brother is alive is never permitted. And so both of these remain prohibited during the lifetime of that which prohibits it, either the blood or the brother being alive. And that's not true of Eshet Ish, where if they get divorced, even if the husband is still alive, as long as they get divorced, his wife is now permitted to other people. So we cannot learn from these two to all other cases that the beginning of insertion is considered a full sexual act. Okay, a question on that question says this is not true. From the language of your question, it sounds like you're implying that nidan eshet ach only during the lifetime of that which prohibits them, they are prohibited. But after that goes away, then they are permitted. But that's not actually technically true. Nida biometal yamilta. Nida, it's not like she's only prohibited while there is blood, and after the blood stops, then she's permitted. No, she has to count 7 days, and she has to do things, mikveh, in order to become permitted. So that's not true. And eshet ach bebanim talya rachamana. And the sister-in-law also, it's not just that if he dies, that's it, the wife is permitted, only if he dies without children, right? And then you go do Yibum, then it's permitted. So the language of your question is not exact. Ela parichachi. So we'll revise the question against using nida and eshet ach as a twin coming together to teach about all other cases. Ma nida ve'eshet ach sheken en osran matiran. Tomar be'eshet ish she'osrah matira. Okay, so we'll take into account what we just said. A nida, the thing that prohibits her is not the very thing that permits her. What prohibits her is seeing blood. What permits her is waiting and going to mikveh. So to eshet ach, what prohibits the brother from being with his sister-in-law is the marriage. What permits them is him dying without children and doing yibum. So these are different things. Whereas eshet ish, that which prohibits her, which is this man marrying her, is also what permits her by him ending that marriage through divorce is permitted. So that's what the question was. That those two have a common denominator that not all cases have. And so now we're back to our original question. How do we know that in all cases of prohibited relations, that the beginning of insertion of the member is already considered a sexual act and deserving of punishment? It's because of the ending pasuk in Perek Yudchet of Vayikra that says anyone who does any one of these abominations will get karet. So you see that this concluding pasuk lumps all of the previous prohibitions together. Hukshu kol arayot kulan lenida, and they're all comparable with each other. If they're all comparable with each other, they're all comparable to nida. Ma nida b'hara'a, afkol beha'ara'a. And since the nida said that word he'era, and so we know that for nida, insertion, beginning of insertion is prohibited. Therefore, we can learn from there to all others. Very good. And so this is kind of a hekesh that we're learning from, in which it does not matter if this one has a particular feature or the other one doesn't have a particular feature. That would be a problem only for a binyan av type of derivation. But this derivation works for everything. All right, good. So ve'ela nida dichtiva gabe eshet ach lamali. Okay, now we're going to go back because we did have those two other sources that do have some word that does connect it with. That's an extra word from which we learned the he'ara, the insertion law. So what are we going to do now? We don't need those words in the others. So the word nida that is said regarding sister-in-law, right? It called her if someone is with his brother's wife. It called that a prohibition and says it's like nida. Well, if we don't need that word nida to teach us this about insertion, beginning of insertion, then why do we need the word nida? Oh, we need it for a different thing that Rav Huna said, because he said, how can we find a hint regarding Yevamot, a sister-in-law, Yibum? How do we have a hint about the permission of a brother to be with a Yevamot? We ask, and then now we interrupt Rav Huna's words. Minayin? What kind of question is that? You're asking where? Haketiv, Yevamah, Yavah. That's an whole explicit pasuk in Devarim that we've been discussing endlessly. So, Eladem is Livamah Shesra Bechaye Ba'ala Minayin. No, what I meant to ask is, how do you know that while the brother-in-law is alive, that it's prohibited to take a sister-in-law, even if they divorce, right? In other words, we know from Devarim that if a man dies without children, then the live brother, can take her with Yibum. Yes, of course. But what if you have a brother, a man and a wife who are married and they divorce? Maybe then the brother who was not married can take his former sister-in-law. There's not a sister-in-law anymore. So where can we find a hint? We know that that's prohibited. It's isur karet, because these prohibitions are there forever, except for two sisters. That's the only one that changes when someone dies. So we know it's isur karet, but where do we have a hint for this law? We can learn it from logic from the pasuk about Yibum, since the Torah in Devarim says that after a man dies without children, then the brother is permitted to his sister-in-law. So we can infer that while the deceased is alive, while the brother who's married is alive, then his brother is prohibited. So it just makes logical sense. Okay, good. Vidilma, hold on, not necessarily. That inference is not necessarily true. Vidilma lachar mitat ba'ala mitzvah. Maybe after the Yevamah's husband dies, then it's a mitzvah for the Yavam, to go and do Yibum. Bechaye ba'ala reshut. But while her first husband is alive, maybe and they divorce, maybe there's no mitzvah for the Yavam to be with her. The word Yavam actually just means brother-in-law, but he can be if he wants. So we don't know from the Pasuk in Devarim. Pasuk in Devarim only says after he dies, and it's a mitzvah. While he's alive, I don't know. It doesn't say anything about that. So we're still looking for a hint for this. Dilma mitzvah b'chevel reshut iname lachar mitat ba'ala in b'chaye ba'ala lo v'lav haba michlal aseh aseh. Or another way of interpreting that also would not tell us anything substantial is we can say that the pasuk in Devarim is in fact saying that after her first husband dies, then the brother-in-law can take her. But while alive, cannot take her. But what would be the status of the prohibition if we only learned it from the pasuk in Devarim? It says Yevamah yavo aleh. From there we learn a lav that comes from is based on an aseh. The aseh is after he dies, then Yavam go and do yibum. Or while he's alive, it's prohibited, but this prohibition only has the force of a misvat aseh, which is much lower than a law ta'aseh, and certainly much lower than karet. So even if you derive that it's prohibited, we wouldn't derive the stringency of the prohibition. Okay, so we're back to our question. What's a hint? How do we know from the Torah that even after someone divorces, the brother cannot take the wife? They cannot take his former sister-in-law. Oh, this is why we need the word nidah, right? A man should not be with his brother's wife, and it's considered like a nidah. So what does this mean? Is she always a nidah, this woman? Ela ken nidah. Man nidah afa pi sheyesh la heter lachar mikan beshat isura bekaret afeshet ach name afa pi sheyesh la heter lachar mikan bechaye bala bekaret. Rather, there is a similarity between a sister-in-law and a nidah. Just like a nidah, where she is prohibited now, but she will be permitted at some point after she waits 7 days. Mikveh, she will be permitted. Yet, while she is prohibited, while she is nidah, the prohibition is a level of karet. So too, a sister-in-law has the same law. Even though it is possible for a sister-in-law to become permitted if her husband dies without children, then the Yavam will be permitted to her. And nevertheless, while they are prohibited, the prohibition is in Isur Karet. So there you go. That is a source from the Torah that one may not be with his brother's wife, even if they get divorced while he is alive, and the prohibition is Isur Karet. The derivation is because it's like Nidah. Good. Now we know we did what we do with that word nidah, because we don't need it anymore to teach us about he'ara. Okay. Ela he'ara dichtiva gabe achot av achot em lamali. Okay, so let's go back to the word he'ara that is mentioned by a prohibition of marrying an aunt. And above we tried to use that as a derivation for all cases where a beginning of insertion is considered like is considered a full sexual act. But now we don't need that anymore because we're using the hekesh from nidah. So that what are we going to learn from there? And the answer is so this is used to answer a different question of Ravina asked Rava, which is someone who only begins insertion in a homosexual act. What is that considered? So then we say, no, we know that answer. Regarding Mishkav Zachur, it says, it compares it if someone is with another man in a way of sleeping with a woman. And the word mishkebe is plural here, the sleepings of a woman. And so we learned from there that we're comparing, just like there are two ways of being, and any way that one would be prohibited with being with a woman also would be prohibited with a man, and that includes the beginning of insertion. So no, we don't need any pasuk for that. Ella, rather, what do we need the one in ant for? The question is, what about for bestiality? Is the beginning of insertion considered like a full act? אם אינו עניין להרעה, דכתיב באחות אב ואחות אם, דתיה בהיקשה מדרביונה, תנהו עניין להרעה דבהמה. And his answer was, yes, I have a source for it, and the source is for an ant. Not because an ant has anything to do with animals, but rather we use im eno inyan derivation. Whenever you have a law that's not needed for its context, so we copy and paste it over to a place that is needed, where it doesn't say anything, and we need a derivation. So in this case, because I don't need to learn the law of beginning of insertion regarding ant, because over there we learn it from the hekesh of Rabbi Yonah from Nida. So since it's not needed here, so we will apply it. It's like apply a surplus in the budget in one category. So you take that money and you apply it somewhere else. So to here we will apply it to the case of bestiality. That also, yes, there the beginning of insertion is like a full act. Okay, mikdi behema chayave mitot bedinhi. Maitama ketiv lehada'adida gabe chayave karetot. Okay, now we ask a question. The prohibition of bestiality is death penalty by the human court. So since that is even more stringent, how come when the Torah chooses to write this prohibition, it writes it regarding an ant, where that's only in the chiyuv karet? Okay, this is relates to a bigger question of the im eno inyan. Why not write it at the point regarding behema, if that's where it's supposed to be? Okay, so you can question the entire basis of this, but here we're asking a more limited question. If you're going to put it somewhere else for whatever reason, at least put it in a law that's equivalent, that is also chayav mita, and not one that is only chayav karet. The answer is lichtov gabe mitat betin v'nelef mitat betin mitat betin. This is part of the question. Why not put it in another law that is mitat betin, and then we can learn one mitat betin from another law that is also punishable, a death penalty by a court, and that would be a better place to put it. And the answer is Aide de kule kera lidrasha ate keti bename ha mileta lidrasha. Oh, the answer is that the ant pasuk is a better one, because the entire pasuk is actually not necessary for its own context and is only there to teach other laws. And therefore, it's a good idea to put it in this pasuk, what the entire pasuk is extra. And that way, I already know I'm hyperlinking and using these words for lots of other things. And that's why it's an appropriate place to put those extra words. And now we're going to further explain, go into a lengthy discussion about the prohibition against an ant, and explain what we learn from this pasuk. Let's look at the pisukim first, and then we'll see why, in fact, it is considered extra. So we have the list of arayot is found in Vayikra, first in chapter 18, and then the list is repeated in chapter 20. Chapter 20 adds the punishments for them. This is a classical case of first giving a warning and then giving the punishments. But still, we wonder why the details need to be repeated. And so the pasuk that we have been focusing on so far is this one, Vayikra 20:19, Ve'ervat achot imecha v'achot avicha lo tegale, the mother's sister or father's sister, so biological aunt, in aunt by blood. Ki et shero he'ara avona misao. So we're looking at this word he'ara, and we decided that this word he'era is not needed for its own context to teach that partial insertion is like full insertion, and so therefore we said we're going to apply it to the case of behema. Great. But then we asked, why not put this word with a mitat betin? So the answer is because this entire pasuk is extra and is going to be used for a derasha. What makes it extra? Well, up here, Vayikra 18 already says, Ervat achot avicha lo tegale. That's she'er avicha he. That the father's sister, the father's sister. And next pasuk is about a mother's sister. So that's already talking about a aunt by a blood relation. The next pasuk also talks about achi avicha lo tegalet lishto. this would be an uncle's wife. And there's another pasuk in 20 also about an uncle's wife. This is going to come in to play in the following discussion. All right, so since this whole pasuk is extra because you have it here, that's why we put the word He'edah here. All right, so just to anticipate what we're going to be discussing now, because it's going to be a few paragraphs till we get to this pasuk, our question is, I know it says here that a father's sister is prohibited. Well, what if it's only his half-sister? So half-sister from his paternal, from his father, or what about if it's half-sister from his mother, the father's mother, right? Are those both prohibited? That's going to be our question, and we're going to derive it. Yes, both are prohibited from Vayikra 20, which is an extra pasuk. So that's what we're going to do with it. Okay, my derasha. What is the derasha? De Tanya. Arvat achot avicha lo tegale. This is pasuk in chapter 18. Father, sister. Ben mina'ah, ben mina'em. The midrash halacha, this is all the braita, starts off with the conclusion. It says, yes, whether from the father's side or the mother's half-sister. From the half-sister from the mother's side. Ata omer ben mina'ah, ben mina'em, o eno ela mina'ah velo mina'en. Then we question this assumption. What is your source? How do you know that a father's sister is prohibited, half-sister is prohibited, whether maybe it's only his father's paternal half-sister, not the maternal half-sister. Vidinhu. So first we can say it's logic. Chayev kan v'chayev ba'achoto. Let's compare it to a person's sister. Not his aunt, but the prohibition against a man and his sister. Ma'achoto ben mina'ah ben mina'em. That applies to half-sister also, whether it's paternal half-sister or maternal half-sister. Afkan ben mina'ah ben mina'em. So too, in the case of an aunt, it'll be prohibited to the father's half paternal sister or half maternal sister. So that's a good comparison, but maybe not. There's something else to compare to. We can compare the aunt to the following case. Chayev kan v'chayev bedodato. Dodato means an uncle's wife. It's also an aunt, but aunt through marriage. So ma dodato mina'ah velo mina'em, afkan mina'ah velo mina'en, mina'em. In the case of an uncle's wife, that only applies to the father's half, if it's a half, the father's paternal half-brother's wife, but not to the father's maternal's brother's half-wife. And so if we compare the biological aunt to the aunt through marriage, then it would in fact only be from the father and not from the mother. So now we have a quandary. Which one should we compare the biological aunt to? Danin isur haba me'elav, me'isur haba me'elav. You might say that we should compare those two that are blood relations, meaning that they come on their own, and therefore we compare a sister, where it's both father's side and mother's side half sisters, to the aunt, and then also the aunt would be both mother and father's side when it's a aunt by blood. And leave out the aunt through marriage, because that does not come by itself from blood. All right, that's logical, but we can make yet another opposite argument. We can compare relatives of a father to other relatives of the father, meaning compare a case of aunts, aunt by marriage and aunt by blood. Those are comparable. And don't bring in a person's own sister. That's different. That's the same generation. So better to compare the prior generation, the two cases that are about a father's relatives. So that also makes sense. Okay, so now we're still left without knowing which one we should compare the biological aunt to. Talmud lomad, edvat achot avicha lo tegale. And so comes the other pasuk in Vayikra 20 to teach us that ben mina'av, ben mina'em, father or mother. So there you go, right? This is what this pasuk is for. All right. Now that we brought this, we're just going to add that the same is true on the mother's side. A man's mother's sister is also prohibited. Whether it's the mother's half sister from her father's side or her mother's side, also those are prohibited. So once we bring that, because there are two separate pesukim in that regard, so then we ask, Lama lil michteva b'achot av, lama lil michteva b'achot em? Why do you need to tell me that both of the father's half sisters are prohibited, and both of the mother's half sisters are prohibited? Just tell me one or the other, and I could figure it out. Don't need both. No, I do need both. Dikatav rachamana b'achot av sheken yesh la hais aval achot ema lo. No, if you only told me regarding the father's half siblings, then I would have said, oh yeah, on the father's side, we extend it to his mother's and his father's, because there is ancestry. Person's ancestry for inheritance and for identification, tribal identification, goes through the father. And so therefore, the father would be stronger, but I would say the mother, maybe not, because one's lineage does not go through the mother. Jewishness, yes, but not within Judaism. The status of Kohen, Levi, things like that, go through the father. And so I would say maybe that connection with the mother is less. That's why I have to tell us that the mother's half sisters, both her father and mother's half sisters, through her father and through her mother's half sisters, are prohibited. And if it only said regarding the mother, I would say, yeah, over there the prohibition is greater, because we know for sure who a poor person's mother is. There are people around when she gives birth, and we know this kid is who belongs to. But fatherhood is never known for sure. And so I might say that the prohibition of the father is less, and that's why the pasuk has to go out of its way and say, also for the father, his half sisters, from his mother or from his father, are both prohibited. I might say that's why I have to say it, sericha, and that's why in fact I do need both derivations. And finally, one more last point. V'dodato defeshita le letana demina velo mina mina le. This whole time with that Rasha, we were assuming that for an uncle's wife, that prohibition, we assumed that it is only the father's paternal brother's wife that's prohibited, but the father's maternal brother's wife is permitted. That's why we were wondering, do we compare it to this or that? But that itself, how do you know that? Minale amarava atyad dodo. We have the word dodo gezerah shava regarding uncle. Ketiv hacha ervat dodo gila. Regarding an uncle's wife, it says the word dodo. Ketiv hatam o dodo o ben dodo yigalenu. And in Vayikra 25, when it's talking about if a Jew has to sell himself because of poverty to a non-Jew, then his family should redeem him and to get him back to freedom. And it says there, Dodo, his uncle or his cousin, should redeem him. Someone. Over there, the word Dodo means from his father, and not from his father's family, has to redeem him, and not his mother's family. So you see the word Dodo means from the father's side and not the mother's side. Okay, good. So that's how we know it. But now, how do we know that itself? How do you know regarding redemption? That's only the father's side of the family that has an obligation to redeem their relative. The pasuk also says, someone from the family shall redeem. Only the father's side of the family is called family. The mother's side is not called family. I assume this is because the laws of inheritance, so for financial matters, and generally when someone got married, the wife would go and live on the estate and with the husband's family, and so therefore the father's side is the stronger one and has the obligation to help out their relative and redeem them. Baruch Adonai L'olam, Amen ve'Amen.